What's the price tag of public safety? Welcome to The Record on the Road. I'm Mark Maxwell. In the hot summer streets of St. Louis, where this city just recently celebrated struggle, survival, and the soul of self-expression. But this past weekend, that question, how much does public safety cost and who picks up the tab? That question echoed louder than the police sirens that pierced the Pride weekend here in the Grove. It was supposed to be a celebration of love and identity in one of St. Louis's most vibrant corridors, but what unfolded along Manchester Avenue left behind more than broken glass and bruises. It left a confounding understanding of who is really responsible when celebration turns to confrontation.
So what happened the night before and last night was nothing short of just sadness for our community, because our community comes together to celebrate our life and what we're allowed to do and what we're allowed to be now that we fought so hard for. And then when we have teenagers out in the streets fighting each other and carrying guns and doing stuff that's not even a part of our community, that shuts us down and shuts our celebration down, it's really hurtful to us.
That was Chad Fox. He owned Rehab and has for the last 15 years. He's seen the Grove transform from a struggling corridor to a cultural anchor in the St. Louis region. This last weekend, it was once again a magnet for Pride revelers, but not all who gathered came to celebrate. While Pride St. Louis downtown was hailed a large success, with estimates of the crowd there at 150,000 people plus, just a few miles west in the Grove, the scene started to spiral.
Multiple fights broke out on Friday, which led to a shooting on Friday night in the Grove. There was two females that were shot. One of the individuals who was shot was a suspect who was also one of the shooters. A 22-year-old woman was arrested. An armed suspect climbed on the back of one of our officers while armed with a rifle. This is madness. These are people that have absolutely no regard for any type of person or human life.
You heard the police spokesman there, Mitch McCoy, a former TV reporter, use the word madness to describe the chaotic scene. In our reporting, we used a different word, mayhem, to describe what we saw happen, but McCoy would object to our use of that word mayhem, apparently more interested in policing the word choices of his former colleagues in the press corps than in taking responsibility for preserving order in the streets where they work.
All of the bar owners know that this is a major crowd that comes out for Pride, and someone's going to have to take responsibility for it. The police can't.
The police can't take responsibility for basic crowd control? Was the police department creating a new expectation that public safety is now in our hands? What are those tax dollars for if that's the case? 2 days later, when Mitch McCoy approached the microphone once again, I was there to ask him some of those questions. You told reporters on Monday that bar owners, not police, should take responsibility for the mayhem in the Grove. These business owners pay taxes for public safety. They often pay for private security in addition. How can it be your position that business owners should take responsibility and that police officers shouldn't? Did the chief authorize you to say that?
I appreciate the question, Mark, and within context of what I said, and I shared it in the briefing, that it was bar owners, the community improvement district, the associations in that area, everyone coming together to make sure that there is a solid plan in place to keep bad actors out. And so that is still standing by that today. At the end of the day, everybody has to be at the table having a productive conversation to make sure that we keep everyone safe in some of these large-scale events.
You don't regret what you said? You don't think you owe these bar owners an apology?
I think everybody needs to be at the table.
Did the chief authorize you to say those words?
I speak on behalf of the police department.
So the official stance of the police department, according to Mitch McCoy, is that it now falls to the business owners to protect not just their premises, but the sidewalks and the streets and the neighborhoods around them? How wide exactly is that radius? How much ground should a business owner have to cover, preserve, and protect? The owner of Rehab said they had actually done just that, at least for the customers who were waiting in long lines to get in the door.
We had them secure. We had our officers outside making sure that nothing happened to them. I had the line all the way down to Vandeventer, and everybody that was in the end of the line was like, well, we didn't feel like it, bothered us at all. But just keep that in mind, that even though there's craziness going outside in the streets, your safe place is still here for you.
So business owners paid their taxes. Some of them pay a premium tax rate through the Community Improvement District for additional private police. Some hire private security. On top of that, they secured their premises. So what more could police want from them? Turns out, an expensive permit. I just have to follow up on the practicality of what you're suggesting.
Sure.
Make sure I understand what you're saying.
Sure.
What exactly do you want from these businesses? If they're not sanctioning an event, if they're not filing for a permit, what do you want them to do?
Be a part of the larger conversation that's happening when it comes to public safety. And I think that as we have conversation, well, if you let me finish, you interrupted me, Mark. What I would say is that we have unique challenges in the city when it comes to people armed with guns, when it comes to people that don't want or may not want to participate in the events of a neighborhood. But this is historically a area that has been permitted in the past as a planned event, and we have to make sure that we keep everyone safe. And what I can tell you is that we have to be realistic with the challenges that we face, and when we have officers being injured and we have innocent people being injured, there was obviously a failure at some point along the communication line when it comes to how Pride would work in the Grove. And what we are saying and what we are asking is that there is a much larger conversation with all of the stakeholders, not just the bar owners, all of the stakeholders, to make sure that everyone has a safe and enjoyable Pride. That's what I'm saying. Any other questions? Mark?
You didn't answer the question. You didn't say what you want from them. You want them to be a part of the conversation?
We
They need to say what?
We need them to be at the table, having the conversation of who is going to be organizing, who is going to be getting the permit, who is going to be helping our police officers so they are not attacked.
Well, it's not the bar owner's fault.
It's everyone in the neighborhood.
But that's the whole point. If everyone is responsible, then no one is accountable. If every bar has to guess when to act like a festival organizer and no city agency or the police department is stepping in to help with crowd control, then what exactly are their tax dollars paying for? According to McCoy, if you ever held an event in the past, then the city apparently expects you to keep footing the bill for those permits, fences, and checkpoints every year, whether you're officially hosting an event or not.
This is a historic night, that historically high turnout night, that has been permitted in the past. And that is the answer. Everybody needs to be at the table, so that way we are having a conversation on how we keep individuals who are armed with guns, who are armed with fireworks, from attacking innocent people and our officers. Because as a police officer, you can't stop someone walking down Manchester with a firearm. Can we agree on that?
It's a tough job.
Can
But
we
you're
agree
asking
on
them
that?
to pay extra cost. I'm telling you, they pay taxes, they pay for private security, and you're asking them to pay more for a permit. They might not want to pay for a permit. Then what?
Well, they've paid for a permit before. Cherokee Street pays for a permit. Mardi Gras pays for a permit. Celebrate St. Louis pays for a permit to ensure that there are safety guidelines in place to keep people who shouldn't be in there out.
I'm just curious though, I guess, what is the practical difference? Sorry, not to, well, I'm piggybacking on what he says, but how does the permit change the plan, practically speaking? Because from my perspective, if you know that there's going to be more people in the Grove during Pride weekend, as there always is, I guess I'm wondering what's stopping the police department from just having more proactive patrols and more people down there. What does a permit change, practically speaking?
It's actually night and day difference, and I appreciate that question. Having a permit allows you to fence off the area that your event is in. It allows you to hire security. It allows you to control the street. So you as an event owner can say, we are not going to allow bags into this event. We are not going to allow firearms into this event. We are not going to allow fireworks into this event. We are not going to allow loudspeakers and Bluetooth speakers into this event. And we as police officers, or the police officers, cannot, those rules are not as flexible without a permit. And that is what we're saying, is that without a permit, the rules are much more loose. The permit tightens the rules on that.
Public safety, if you can afford it. And this year, financial pressures were coming from more than one direction.
This year we didn't get to, the funding wasn't there, and it's just impossible to do unless you just have somebody that's full-time doing this stuff. It's just, when you run a bar, when you run businesses and you run 3 o'clock businesses, your days are just, completely scrambled.
If only there was someone working full-time to do just that, secure public safety and manage crowd control. Michael Browning is the alderman who represents this part of town in the 9th Ward, and he strongly rebutted McCoy's framing in this emailed statement into our newsroom. Quote, representatives from the community met with SLMPD on multiple occasions to come up with a plan for the last weekend of Pride Month. The bars agreed to close earlier than usual, Browning said, in response to a request from the police. But it was agreed that the street would not be closed to vehicle traffic for a couple reasons. One, that would require resources that the Community Improvement District and bars didn't have. And in their many meetings with the police, Browning said they expressed their opinion that street closures without checkpoints encourage chaotic and difficult to control situations that would have the potential to become violent. Browning's statement goes on further. He says, quote, the Grove is not a part of the Pride festivities downtown and does not receive resources or help from the Pride St. Louis Festival, which had its own budget constraints this year due to sponsors pulling out. He said this part of his ward was a victim of a street takeover by a separate crowd, not Pride goers, who were not patronizing the businesses and who located themselves in the street, bringing their own alcohol, drugs, and weapons, he said. The bars had security, which screened and carded people to ensure the safety of their patrons. There was no street festival, no outside alcohol sales, no event that a permit could be applied for. Here's the bottom line. Browning says, quote, the bar owners cannot be responsible for what happens outside their bars and on public streets. That is the job of our police department, who we communicated with repeatedly before the weekend. The president of Pride St. Louis underscored the obvious point that large, unruly crowds don't usually think to ask for a permit in advance.
What you saw in the Grove was not the LGBT plus community. That was not a representation. That is outside agitation, taking advantage of a situation when we should be allowed to celebrate. And it's sad to see that people got hurt. It's sad to see that our businesses were affected and had to close early. That impacts their business. It impacts pay for their employees on this weekend when they rely on that money.
There's that theme again, the cost of public safety. We asked Mayor Kara Spencer many of the same questions. What broke down here? What went wrong? How could all this happen?
I personally reached out to several bar owners, as did many folks within the city government and within the police department, to kind of communicate about what the plan was for that night. Without a sanctioned event and a security process, protocol plan in place, it made it more difficult for city officials, including the police department, to be able to respond in the case that the crowd got out of control. It did get out of control again Sunday evening. There were fights, and essentially what happened as a result of that is the police department cleared the area to provide safety and security. But I will say, it's heartbreaking scenario because the bar owners were not, it wasn't a sanctioned event, and so I think the real takeaway from my perspective, from my administration and for the city, is that we've got to find a path to really have sanctioned events with plans, safety plans, protocols in place in a way that isn't cost prohibitive to a community.
There it is again, safety, but at what cost? This whole episode underscores the whole deal we enter into with government and citizen. What do we owe each other? And what happens when someone doesn't hold up their end of the bargain? We see it here. These streets once welcomed freedom and opportunity to gather. Now they bear the signs of a system and a city stretched to its limits. When we check the record, we find that Abraham Lincoln once said in 1854, quote, the legitimate object of government is to do for a community of people whatever they need to have done, but cannot do it all or cannot do so well for themselves in their separate and individual capacities. Isn't public safety one of those very things? In the end, this isn't just about permits, paperwork, or policing. It's really about what a city owes to its people and what happens when that promise falls short. The Grove will bounce back, pride will return, but the question will linger. What's the price tag of public safety, and who's supposed to pick up the tab? Those answers won't be found in finger pointing, but by individuals and leaders stepping up, showing courage, and taking individual responsibility for themselves and compassion for their neighbors. Until next time, we're off the record.